We're going to begin the meeting.
I did.
Gong.
People's time is valuable. Let's start.
He didn't forget this time.
John,
Depending on the person.
you have a presentation for us, correct?
Yes, Madam Chair,
Okay.
I do.
Go
Very
right
short.
ahead and begin.
A little background to this, as you may or may not know. I think you probably recall from our last development action.
You know, I have railroad ears. I can't hear you.
It's not often, Mike, that people say I'm too quiet. Over the last month or so, we've had some development actions that came through at the Planning Commission level, and they have requested multiple times that they have additional information when making land use decisions. The short and quick answer to that, and the simplest answer, is a development plan. Now, the intention behind this, at least from a staff level, keeping in mind I haven't had an opportunity to take this to the Planning Commission yet, but my recommendation will be that the development plan criteria will only be pertinent to things 2.5 acres or less. In other words, 1 acre lots, which again I think we're going to see a lot of, and 2.5 acre lots when there's 8 or more lots. So a minor subdivision that's just stripping off, say, frontage on a local road, that it's not going to have to submit a development plan for that. But when you have interior local roads, subdivision roads, and they tie into adjoining subdivisions, there are a lot of criteria that are different in higher density development than low density development. So in other words, the development rules you have for 7 lots that are 10 acres or 5 acres with road frontage is substantially different than you have with 80 lots on 150 acres that adjoin other high density developments. So the concerns for those two developments are starkly different. So if we can develop a tool, which in this case, in my view, is a development plan to address those comments at the land use stage, I think it will help the Planning Commission to make a better determination on rezones. Now, one thing to keep in mind with a comprehensive plan, you hear it all the time, what does the future land use plan say? Understand that the future land use plan does not mandate that you make that land use decision. It is simply a reviewing factor in the process. So what does the plan say? This is what it says. Does it mean you have to do with it? No, it does not mean that at all.
Right.
So one thing to keep in mind, you've heard about the 8 golden rules ad nauseum. I know you all have. But some things to keep in mind that planning commissions and board of county commissioners can consider and do consider as part of land use are these: traffic, parking, location, access, archaeological, historic significance, topography, drainage, wildlife presence, design compatibility with surrounding areas, ecological analysis, vegetative analysis, flood hazards, soil survey, sewage disposal, market and economic analysis, water supply, EMS, fire, police, air noise pollution, demographic study, and tax-based implications. You might ask yourself, where did those requirements come from? Well, they come from your subdivision regulations that are currently in existence, and they're based in Kansas statute. So again, the ability to make determinations on things like flood elements or, drainage, those currently exist in the regulations. They currently exist. The power exists in statute for the Planning Commission to make those determinations in the development process. So from a staff standpoint, if we can clean up the considerations and develop those into a set of criteria, which I've included in your presentation here as just a baseline of thought, I think when the determination is made from the Planning Commission level, it gives both them more information to make that determination, and you as a reviewing party or an appellant board to their decision, it gives you an ability to weigh the same criteria that they're weighing on a standards scale, which makes it much, much simpler than simply 8 golden rules with a subjective opinion. So moving through, and I won't discuss each and every one of these development criteria. These are very, very basic elements.
Are you going to take questions at the end, or do you want?
I'm going to take questions at the end.
Okay.
And it's very short, and then we can have a give and take. So you can peruse those, and they're very similar to what you're going to see in a generic preliminary development plan. If you go to the 3rd page, you're going to see some development plan examples. So development plans give you a rendering, not just a plat of what you're going to see. These are going to include tree cover, landscape, ponds, roadways. You can require structure development in there, but you don't have to. If you go to the following page, the fourth page, you'll see at the very bottom there, that is a rendering that only includes lot layout. There are no structures there, but it's overlaid to the existing structures that are on the ground, which is a great tool to present when you're dealing with land use. Now, typically developers are going to have an idea of lot count so that they can determine what kind of cost they're going to have when they invest in a particular piece of property. They don't wait till after land use to assess that. They're assessed up front when they're purchasing the property. Typically, again, there's not going to be a full in-depth analysis, but certainly enough for a development plan to be submitted with a land use application. And in fact, we have one land use application, a pretty sizable one, that the developer simply sent in his preliminary plat with the land use and expects that will be used as part of that. Staff didn't ask for it. That's simply done. This is atypical of what you see in development processes in most areas, so that you can answer the questions of the adjoining neighbors. What's the lot layout's going to be? Generally, where are the roads going to be? Generally, how is the drainage going to be off the site? It's not going to be a defined drainage study, but you will have a general area. For example, this has a detention facility. It has a main drainage area that comes off the top of that. Typically, those lots are going to be graded to that drainage area, and then that off-site water detained on site, with the intent to have a zero net increase off-site. In other words, you're not increasing the amount of runoff than exists in a pre-developed condition. Or you can do it very, very simply. In the picture, the example above it, which simply gives road layout, general tree cover, ponds, and lot coverage, which is a very rural layout. And then the final here is simply plat examples, which you guys have seen a lot of. But I wanted you to see the difference between a traditional rendering of a development plan versus a plat, and what the layman will see when they see both examples. So a layman can look at a development plan and get a better understanding of both road layout, detention facility, and eventual cover that's on site. And with that is the last page of the presentation. I would answer any questions as best I can.
Now, on this development plan, is this going to be just when you're showing the detention pond? Is that going to have to be something that's going to be engineered, or can this just be a concept drawing?
No,
where we're going to have it.
It's a general concept drawing. At a development plan stage, you're just showing that yes, there'll be a detention facility. Can I tell you what pool level is? No. Can I? Yeah. Any other questions?
The whole proposal, I initially thought that the proposal was going to be for the up around the cities, the 1 acre lots. But you have it down to 2.5 acre lots, and that includes a whole lot more properties.
Again, the intention there is not just the acreage, but the number of lots. It's also 8 or more lots. So if you have 2.5 acres and it's less than 8 lots, you don't have to do this. But if you have a large subdivision that's over 8 lots, like we have one that will be heard by the Planning Commission tonight, that's 43 lots on 2.5 acres. That has a substantially different impact than 7 on 2.5 acres.
So the issue is the impact. I mean, when I visited with you about it, we were talking about 1 acre lots.
Right. And again, this is just a proposal, has not been through the Planning Commission. I'm sure they're going to want to tweak this left and right. But my intention here is that it's not just acreage, it's also density. So if you have a large footprint, that impact is substantially more to the adjoining properties and to the transportation elements and drainage elements.
Well, what's the difference if you had a large development with 5 acre lots?
Well, again, what's the number? And 5 acres is substantially more acreage to deter stormwater runoff. The coefficient doesn't change on 5 acres like it does on 1. So you put rooftops, driveways, impervious surfaces on the small acreages, well, that has a substantial impact to the adjoining properties. Do it on 5 acres, it's generally contained on the site. Unless you have an enormous amount of those 5 acre lots, then you still have the traffic impacts and you still have the potential drainage impacts. You'll impact ag uses around it, which in a rural county, you want to protect the land first and you want to protect those agricultural uses. You have to have a place to farm. and farmers don't typically sell their best ground anyway. So again, you're weighing not just one component of the comprehensive plan. You're weighing the entire component of the comprehensive plan. And you're trying to minimize the impacts of joining any development that may occur and answer the questions, the viable questions from the adjoining residents as best you can at a land use stage.
So under our comprehensive plan right now, the higher density is supposed to be near the cities on the sort of the reverse L, Leavenworth, Lansing, Pacer, Tonganoxie.
There is.
And then around those is your 1 acre. But, so that makes a whole lot of sense to me that 1 acre would be important, and also tying in the sewer, where the sewer is going to eventually come out and the services are going to come out from the city eventually, or have some provision for planning for that at least.
Well, the comprehensive plan actually has much higher densities than 1 acre, but 1 acre is the only thing we can deal with on a septic tank. So the highest densities in the comprehensive plan are 3 units an acre, which are substantially higher than that.
And those are up around the city.
And they are up around the city in the initial urban growth areas, which is 660 feet around each one of those communities.
So my initial response to this is I think this is a really good idea as far as the development, but as you get out, I think it'd be easier maybe to administrate it at first if you centered on your 1 acres around the cities, and then see how it works before you extend it out to all 2.5 acreages. That's just my thought.
I disagree with you.
Well, that's unusual.
It is, Don. It is.
Well, here's something unusual. I agree with you. So, we don't allow sewer districts anymore on these developments. Any thoughts on that?
I have thoughts that I'm unprepared to present today.
Okay. Well, this
There's the answer to your question.
last week's the rezone, that was on the comp plan. It says be 3 units per acre, I believe. And it is close to the city. And, if there was to be a sewer district put in there, they're on temporary basis, eventually Baser will come out to get that.
You would hope, but I will tell you this from a city standpoint. It's very hard for a city to come in a developed condition and buy easements, construct collection systems, and do it at a reasonable cost. That is a much harder thing to do than develop sewer prior to platting. That is, so I think that is a substantial challenge that probably needs to be weighed in the process. The 3 units an acre, yes, that is absolutely what the comprehensive plan says. It's just not a reasonable expectation when you know that you're developing in the county. If you develop at 1 acre, the idea that that's going to replat into smaller lots, it's probably never going to replat into smaller lots. 1 acre is the top end of what most rural cities, especially in Leavenworth County, hold as a rural residential zoning designation. So it is what it is at that point. So there are some options out there that I'm sure you'll be presented at some point in time again in the future. Trying to open these one at a time. They kind of one issue bleeds into the next issue, and I think that's something you'll have to evaluate over a period of time and make a decision on which way you want to go. But the higher densities around the cities absolutely make sense. But again, I would stand on my comment that the amount of lots, regardless of where it's at in the plan or in the county, that really should be the driving factor at the land use stage of whether or not you have a development plan. Keeping in mind that a development plan doesn't subdivide property.
Right.
It's simply, and getting to your point, I think if there had been a development plan presented that night where the residents could have looked at that development plan, I think a lot of those questions would have been answered, and that action may have gone a different way. So when you don't have any plan, and you simply say, I'm going to change this land use, people are justifiably concerned. So if we can put a tool in place that benefits both the board or the commission making the determination and the affected property owners, I think that's a win-win, on both sides of the ball.
Well, just say when the city does come out and they annex, they're going to have to hook on the sewers anyways.
That's true. They will have to do that, but the city will have to provide those services to annex, which is a substantial check to write before you decide that you want that amount of structure. So, the annexation rules have changed considerably over the last 15 years, and what cities have to do to annex those smaller developments.
As you recall, John, a few years ago when we were out Lansing, we had someone, I don't know, it was High Prairie or something out by Menard Park, wanted to come into the city, but they wanted us to pay the cost to run the lines and stuff like that, and we gladly would have taken them in. Maybe there could have been some kind of agreement, but the council chose to go in a different direction because of the costs associated with it. I think there needs to be a plan, though, because we know these places are going to eventually end up in the city. So I think that's where we've got to have something that, I don't know what the answer is, but it's got to be something that we can make sure that happens for the city's standpoint also.
I think the short answer to that is if you utilize the platting process to set aside properties for future collection systems during the platting process, which you can include in the development plan, you have a route for cities to accommodate that future sanitary sewer service. But we don't have a vehicle to get there yet. This is a first stage of that. So to answer your question, you're absolutely right. Should they choose to do it, they need a pathway to get there. And as opposed to buying those properties, it's better to dedicate those properties as part of a plat.
That kind of makes sense.
And the city can then, put those funds into the hard improvements that have to go into those areas. But those are questions for another day. Today's question is simply, does this make sense from a land use standpoint? And from a staff standpoint, it answers questions for both entities involved, the decision maker and the affected resident. And I think if we could bring you policies that do that, we're always going to.
It's being forward thinking.
Yeah, I think so.
I have a question.
He's got a question.
So if I'm asking for a rezone and I'm planning to have a development, and you ask me to pay for a development plan, first of all, how much is that going to cost? And secondly, I spend that money, and my contention is that whether you have a development plan or not, X number of people are not in favor of any kind of development. And if you spend the money on this development plan and then we come to the commission and it gets turned down, I'm just out that money.
If you've purchased the property and you've invested in the property and the professionals to put the plan together to get to the land use section and you're denied, you still have investment that you can't recoup. So the development plan process is not guaranteed in any way, shape, or form. You take certain risks to be a developer.
How much additional cost is it going to add?
Well, it depends on the size of the subdivision. Typically, these are going to be between $1,500 and $6,000 for a plan. So if you've got 43 lots, that's a negligible cost, development cost over each and every one of those lots.
But if I have a small development,
Then you wouldn't apply to you anyway.
if I'm going to do 8 or 10,
Well,
I'm
if
going to
you're
have
gonna- if
more
you're gonna
cost
10
than if
lots,
I have
2.5.
43.
Yeah, it's always going to be more costly.
So the small developer is going to be impacted disproportionately.
But that's,
That's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing are higher density developments.
I'm just going with the cost of what this is going to add.
So again, the development criteria for a larger rural lot of 5 acres, 7 acres, 2 acres, that's 5 lots, 6 lots. Substantially different set of requirements than 40 or 50 lots. So if you try to apply these 5 to 7 lot criteria to your 50, you're going to run into a lot of problems, left and right. You're not going to be able to answer the questions to the adjoining residents, and you're going to have hiccups in the process. So, yes, will it cost you more to put a development plan together? It will. Is it a negligible cost? It absolutely is. It's far cheaper than sewers, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, street lights, all of the associated things that you incur if you develop in any other area but the county. And simply because you're in the county developing doesn't mean that your criteria should be wiped, at least in staff's view. Your
I
criteria
agree.
should be wiped off the
Well, I just want us to go in with this eyes wide open and realize that if we do this, we're adding cost.
That is absolutely true, but that is a product of progress.
yep.
Well, that's not how everybody looks at it.
Well-
I understand.
I like it. I'm fine with it. We're going in the right direction. We're always going to tweak it when we get down the road a little bit. County commissioners can have the shot at it again after planning commission.
It just needs to go, and you need to bring it forward, I think, to the planning commission and get their input as
Yep,
well. But
I agree. Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am. And again, I'm simply making a recommendation. I'm not the policy.
Don't
maker.
kill the messenger.
At the
You
end of
just
the
bring
day.
some things for us to chew on.
I think the point is that John's making is that per lot, the cost added to this, if it goes forward, is $200-300 a lot. On a $60,000 to $100,000 lot, that's really insignificant. But I think the point that Commissioner Stevens is trying to make is you only get to recover that if the process goes forward. If you get turned down, you're just out that money.
But
So
that's the same-
It exposes a higher risk to the developers than we currently have. So those are things that have to be taken into consideration.
That's true.
I'm good.
Jeff?
Oh, I had a couple things I was going to say, but one of them, I thought the planning board was going to be here too, so it's more geared toward them, but I'll go ahead and say it for people that are watching probably. So I get a lot questions or statements thrown at me that why do we do this process where people ask for a variance from the zoning map and then it goes through the process, and I think this is part of the problem with the planning board. They don't really understand the comp plan is basically our new zoning map. We still have the old zoning map, which is our legal zoning map, but the process to make the new comprehensive plan, our new zoning map, is very expensive and labor intensive, and we'd have to have public hearings on every single property that changed, and so that's just not the best way to do this. The better way to do it is ask for a variance from the zoning map that matches the comprehensive plan. So basically, we're making people ask for a variance from the zoning map because it matches the comprehensive plan. But I know it looks to a lot of people like, well, we're just rubber stamping everything that comes in and asks for a variance. If it doesn't match the zoning map, we're passing it anyway. Well, that's because the zoning map is really not our zoning map. The comprehensive plan is our zoning map. I think that's hard for people to understand. So I was going to say that for the benefit of the planning board. That's all I got to say about that. The other thing was more of a GIS question. I noticed, so you're requiring a digital copy of, say, a plat that comes in. Is that required to be in a real-world coordinate digital copy? Because, I mean, a JPEG or a DXF or a DWG drawing is a digital map. But is it required to be in any kind of a real-world coordinate so that the plat drawn by the developer's engineer could be dropped right in the GIS, so you take out a little bit of human error in the process if you require that to be real-world digital when it comes in?
Well, we defer the GIS components to Public Works, but it's my understanding that it is.
I can answer that question.
Okay.
The answer to that is no. But as we move through the county, we are putting real-world coordinates on every section corner. And so we had completed Alexandria, and we're about 15 section corners away from completing Easton Township. So over the course of the next 6-7 years, we'll eventually get to the entire county where we'll be able to accept them. But the short answer is no. They're still in the center of the Easton Center intersections and different geographic features to determine the section corner location on a lot of these.
Okay. I was just wondering how far along that was. Sounds good. That's all I had.
But your comment about everybody saying they just rubber stamp everything, well, if it meets the comp plan, it probably should be rubber stamped.
Yep. And that's kind of
Just
my
going
point.
through the public
That-
hearing, going through the motion.
Yeah, they're not understanding that, well, it doesn't match the zoning map, but they pass it anyway. They need to understand it's because it matches the comp plan.
$285,000 for a comp plan.
Yes.
Well, we don't have to rubber stamp the land use plan, just because that's a guideline. That's
Right.
not required. That you then apply the golden rules to the proposal.
Yeah, and there's an exception to every rule, and each case is unique. But my biggest point is people are thinking it doesn't match the zoning map, but they pass it anyway. They need to understand is what we look at is does it
Land use.
match the comp plan
Yeah.
is what we look at over the zoning map.
Well,
Look at Hartford.
the question before
Yeah.
us right now is, do we agree to go ahead and move this proposal to the Planning and Zoning Board, or do we send him back to the drawing board and say, no, not at this point?
I
So-
personally support what he's come up with, but I would like to keep it to the 1 acre and lower acreages around the cities to begin.
I disagree, so I don't know what.
Has there been any more conversation about the urban growth areas? I know years
3 mile
back,
deal.
we were going to make a 3-mile radius from all the cities be automatically the urban growth areas, but I didn't like that because it had no topology components in it for one thing, so they were going to annex an automatic 3 miles out when it was, downhill or uphill, sorry.
I just think that for consistency and.
The urban growth area, it wasn't annexation. Urban growth area is not an.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, I didn't mean
It
that.
is enforcement of the development rules for the city. They're allowed
Right.
to.
Pre-annexation.
Pre-annexation, so that
Just to
they
make
can
sure
control
that we're-
development
Just
around
give
the
them-
boundaries,
Right.
Yeah.
so that you don't get a landlocked city because of development that occurs. That's a statutorily available item for the cities. It's not something the county can force, it's something the cities have to do. But it's really only meant for counties that don't have zoning. So if we have zoning, which we do, our rules have to apply. We would have to basically exclude those areas from our zoning in order for them to be able to do that. It would have been a process. It's not something that just would have happened automatically. We reached out to the cities, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years ago probably, and asked them if they had interest in that. I think the cities looked into it, and the response back to us was no. I think one city attempted it, and it
Well, I think that happened with Baser.
Baser, yep.
And Lansing backed out then.
That they didn't like, so they backed out of it, and we have no cities that have currently asked us to exclude any area from our zoning so that they can then extend theirs into it. So right now, there are no urban growth areas. We do notify the cities when we have developments that happen within a certain area, then they can provide comments back.
And the biggest thing was this, people that own property was going to have to fall under rules that they could not vote on the elected officials enforcing them.
Yep. Yeah, there's several problems I saw with it, and I kind of dropped it because it seemed to me that their county comprehensive plan addresses what the good parts of what the UAGs would be.
Well, Commissioner, we actually did this in Leavenworth County a number of years ago, and I was part of that process. And, again, at the end of the day, I don't think the intended outcome was the outcome that was received. And Mark's right. There's really only 2 ways to accomplish that. You either form a joint planning board that has parts of your planning commission and the city's planning commission, which we actually did that. It didn't work at that time. So if I were asked to give you a recommendation, I would say I would not recommend that, having gone through that process in this county in the past.
Yes, we did.
I agree.
I just think that what you have brought to us is something,
I agree.
I support bringing what we have looked at today to the Planning Commission. And so right now, we're 2 and 2. What about you, Jeff?
I agree.
Okay, so the consensus then with the majority would be to move forward with what you have presented to us to take to the Planning and Zoning Board.
Yeah, it comes out. Yeah.
Understood? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, group. Appreciate your
Okay.
comments.
I think we're done.